Welcome back in, everybody, to Wednesday's edition of Birds 365. Joined now by Brandon Lee Gowton, BLG from Bleeding Green Nation. What's going on, BLG?
Hey, guys. Glad to be here.
Big smile day, Brandon. Jaws took us down the smile route, so we got to go down that. Jalen doesn't smile enough, which I can't get into the personality talk. We got to talk about it because it's the off season, all that kind of stuff. But boy, I just don't get why. And if it's coming from people in the Eagles organization, it's worse to me because shouldn't they know by now that everybody's got different personalities? Everybody can't be Brandon Graham. Everybody can't be the most popular guy in the room like Jason Kelsey. Everybody's got different personalities. How did the Eagles not know that by this point?
Yeah, I do want to say on the Jaws point, like, as I'm sure, you guys know, Jaws is someone, they've consulted in the past when it comes to like, hiring head coaches.
That is true.
This isn't just, this isn't like, I think just totally opining 100%. I think there's some of this, and also it lines up with what we heard about some of the reporting. I think it was actually around the Super Bowl, talking about how the Eagles wanted Jalen Hurts to like look like he was having more fun and really enjoy himself when he was at the Pro Bowl this year. So,
I'm not by the way, I'm not dismissing Jaws' point. And I think it coming from the Eagles organization is worse. That's my point. I mean,
yeah. I just wanted to clarify that for anyone who's just like, oh, this is just total, idle speculation. I don't think that's the case. Now, again, is that idle speculation? Does that have merit? Is it worthwhile? That we can debate. I do think for Jalen Hurts, you have to, he has to be himself. At the same time, I think there were times last year, and I think we've seen enough from reporting and otherwise that maybe some teammates feel like there's a bit of maybe aloofness or something there where I think they would like to see him a little bit more energized, plugged in, invested in a way where I think Jalen does a good job of, not getting too high, not getting too low. But maybe they're, and honestly, I think back to when Doug Peterson said this in 2020 when Jalen was a rookie. I think Doug said something to the effect of like, you have to check if this guy has a pulse sometimes. Like you would like to see a little bit more of a personality emerge through, I think, at certain times.
Yeah, how much stock, BLJ? I asked, we had Mike Gill on in hour number one who had a good take on this. But just to play devil's advocate, because I've grown to come off this thinking, but I go back to the phrase of like desperate times call for desperate measures, or just that different moments call for you to be a different version of yourself. I don't want him to not be Jalen Hurts. I don't want him to go up there and smile uncontrollably because that's not who he is.
Right.
But I do think, you're 1-7 down the stretch. Maybe that requires you to be a different man. I don't know. Maybe it's better because we don't want him to force be something he's not. But what do you think of that train of thought?
No, I think there's something to that. I've been saying, I think, because when you look at the criticisms of Jalen Hurts in this regard, a lot of people will be like, well, everyone thought he was a great leader in 2022 and they were winning a lot. And sure, but I think my argument against that would be that sometimes the situations call for different styles of leadership. I think in 2022, Jalen Hurts did an amazing job of keeping that team locked in and they were focused. I think there were times last year where, maybe that wasn't the right approach because, again, like no one was having fun. It wasn't enjoyable. There was just like this weight on the 2023 Eagles coming off of the Super Bowl loss that there may have been a time for more levity kind of mixed in there. And I don't think we saw that. So maybe, again, it's not one size fits all. That should be Jalen Hurts' approach every time, no matter what. Maybe they're called for a little bit of an adjustment that wasn't there.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the on the field stuff from this perspective, BLG. And I've been talking about that this morning because I wrote about it at Sports Illustrated. Everybody can check it out. But when I saw the Tom Brady clip that was going around, I'm sure you saw it. It was like a 5-minute clip where he kind of boiled down how to play modern quarterback in the NFL. And obviously, people should listen to Tom when it comes to that. And he was talking, he got to pass protection and he got to setting, getting the team into the right play, which is what he said he and Peyton Manning and Drew Brees, he mentioned, and Phillip Rivers, which is big for me because Nick Sirianni, as you know, loves Phillip Rivers. That's how those guys would judge themselves. Not about touchdowns, about yards, about even Super Bowls. Am I putting my team in the best play every single play or as much as humanly possible? And he talked about setting protections. Here, that's been the domain of Jason Kelce, understandably so. Hall of Fame center, one of the best of all time. But guess what? Everybody wasn't on the same page down the stretch last season. And from my perspective, I think it would be better if the quarterback learned how to handle that. And I talked to a personnel guy, and he kind of played it off, to be honest. He said, it's not that big of a deal. They both see the same thing. Well, nobody was seeing the same thing, BLG, down the stretch. And it was Jalen, who people say hot routes, this, that. Phillip Rivers had hot routes in Indianapolis with Nick Sirianni and handled it very well. He dumped the ball up to the running back, Nyheim Hines, and handled it very well. I don't know. I think there's an opportunity with the shift from Jason Kelce to Cam Jurgens. You're not going to take it away from Jason Kelce, understandably.
Right.
The shift here, and I went back to Kellen Moore, and he sort of intimated that, no, Cam's going to do it. I don't like that. Am I overblowing it, or do you think there's something to that?
No, I think that's kind of like if you're looking for more of like, what are some of the more underrated Eagles storylines going into this season, or dynamics even going into training camp? I think how the Eagles replace Jason Kelce, not just literally, who's snapping the ball, but some of those responsibilities before the snap. I think that's a big question mark. It just doesn't seem as simple to me. One for one. Oh, it's just Cam Jurgens. He's that guy. Because Cam Jurgens is not Jason Kelce in so many ways. And I would think that, like you said, where you're not going to take that away from Jason Kelce. But now it's like Jalen Hurts, is a $250 million quarterback who I think wants to have, the onus in this offense. So, I would expect he wants to have kind of more on his plate, knowing his personality and how he's wired. So, yeah, I don't think it's as simple as just, it's Cam Jurgens taking over 100%. I would think Jalen Hurts is going to have more of a voice in there.
Yeah. So the other thing about this is, I wonder how much the expectations after what he was able to do in just his second year as a starter have created this type of. I mean, the guy's 25. We're not talking about a 30-year-old quarterback here. He's still really young. I mean, I know he's got the contract and everything, so everybody expects him to play up to it, and I agree with that. But I do think, I do wonder how much his play in 22 played into the expectations that everybody now has, where we're expecting him to read defenses. We're expecting him to be the leader. We're expecting him to be everything that comes with being a $255 million player. And I think it's a process. And we're going to learn a lot about that process this year going into the season.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, is there a question?
No, it was just a follow-up comment, but go ahead, Johnny Mac.
Over bleedinggreennation.com, you can read Brandon there, editor-in-chief. You would put up the best offensive lines from Brandon Thorne, who's a tremendous offensive line guy when it comes to understanding schemes and things of that nature to establish the run. The positive for the Eagles and remains, and I think, and I've thought from the beginning, the strength of this team, even without Jason Kelce, remains the offensive line. And Brandon had him ranked number 2 behind Detroit, who the Lions have a tremendous offensive line. Too high, too low from your perspective, BLG?
I think, and yeah, to be clear in those rankings too, Brandon Thorne has the Lions in their own tier, at number 1, and the Eagles are at the top of the next tier there. So I think that's worth noting. I think there's a lot of benefit of the doubt baked into that projection. I'm not saying the Eagles don't deserve that benefit of the doubt either, obviously, with Jeff Stoutland and the success that the Eagles have had under him. But there's projection involved, with Tyler Steen, who we don't even know 100% if he's going to be the starter. And that's acknowledged in the write-up too. There's mention of Mekhi Becton and his potential presence to compete for the right guard job there. So, but yeah, again, projection between that the guy next to him that we just talked about in Cam Jurgens, who I think is going to be good. I feel good about Cam Jurgens. I'm very optimistic about his outlook, but again, like haven't seen him play center an extended sample size. So I think it's a little high because again, there's just a lot of projection there. But again, I don't think it's unreasonable just based on if you're going to give a team the benefit of the doubt, the Eagles are probably towards the top of the list of the teams you would feel comfortable doing that with.
Well, now, if you look at the other, and you mentioned the tiers, and you're right, the Lions are in a tier by themselves. I kind of agree with that. I've been talking about the Lions' offensive line for a while. It's very good. Penei Sewell's one of the best in the business overall. Frank Ragnow's been a tremendous center. A lot of injuries, but when he's healthy, he was right there with Kelsey and anybody else as far as the best offensive lines. You kind of see he's got Cleveland at 3. Very good offensive line, no question. Kansas City at 4. Creed Humphrey's another one of the great centers in the league, even though he can't snap it like Jason Kelsey occasionally. And the Colts were number 5 with their old buddy Shane Steichen. They have Quentin Nelson, who's been a big-time left guard for years. But I don't know. I mean, there might be. You're right about the projection, obviously, with Cam and Tyler. Although I'm with you, I think Cam's going to be a good player. It doesn't matter how good. Tyler Steen is the one really wild card. I look at Cleveland and Kansas City and the Colts, and I say, well, they're as good as them, even with those question marks. When you have the 3 foundational pieces of Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson.
Yeah, and you do have the depth, obviously. Again, I mentioned Becton. There is. It's not just, I'm sure, about the starters. It's about who you have behind them.
Well,
and
the depth is interesting because what I don't know what to think. Did your mind change about Matt Hennessy after the spring? Because I was like, that's an interesting signing to me. Because he was a good player in Atlanta. Obviously, you have the injury concerns. But then all of a sudden, it's like, well, they're not really pushing like Matt Hennessy to compete with Tyler Steen, it seems. And then they bring in Max Sharping. Yeah. Did that raise any flags to you about Matt Hennessy?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I mean, I think you can kind of look at it both ways. I think you can say on the positive for Matt Hennessy, he was only really repping at right guard. So maybe in theory, the Eagles are, preparing him in a scenario where Tyler Steen falters, that, he could step up. But then you look on the downside of that, there are multiple opportunities in theory for Matt Hennessy to get first team work between, Landon Dickerson not being there for mandatory minicamp. And then obviously Lane Johnson not being there for OTAs. If they really wanted to, at some point, they could have found a spot to get Matt Hennessy in the lineup. And instead, they chose to have Mekhi Becton in those spots. So clearly, Becton is ahead of Hennessy in the pecking order. And I don't think that was like an absolute given heading into OTAs and everything. So I think there's kind of ways to look at it in the positive and negative for him.
Talking about how good the Eagles offensive line is, BLJ, how much will this impact and help the signing of Saquon Barkley? I mean, Saquon Barkley, we've been debating it all summer, how he's going to be used. What are your expectations for him coming in?
Brandon's one of the few people that agrees with me. I got killed again this week, Brandon. Here's how I'll add to your question, Xander. I brought this up, Brandon. But we go through this every year. Miles Sanders, remember in his rookie year, he really surprised everybody with his pass catching ability. And remember the catch in Washington from Carson Wentz?
What a throw, too.
Yeah, what a throw, what a catch. And everybody's like, Miles is going to be a big impact on the, and it just got worse and worse and worse, and he lost confidence. And then the Eagles drafted Kenny Gainwell, and he played slot receiver at times in Memphis, and what a great receiver. And before the fans turned on him largely. And then last year was DeAndre Swift. What a great receiver. And by the way, DeAndre is a great receiver for a running back. The Eagles just didn't use him that way, from my perspective, because the quarterback doesn't love it. Doesn't love to dump the ball off to the running backs. And here we are again with Saquon. And it's going to be, he's going to be this big weapon. Trademark Howie Roseman, one of his biggest mistakes in my opinion, is typically labeling people and putting these giant expectations on them. We go through this every year, BLG, with the running backs.
The Miles Sanders point is kind of interesting because, and I don't think this is the only reason Miles Sanders, didn't have success, but as his career went on, because he was a rookie in 2019, right? He his receiving prowess went down every year.
At worse, yeah.
Concurrently, Jalen Hurts was more involved in the offense as that happened every year. Obviously from then on. So yeah, that's obviously a factor. I think Saquon's going to be fine. Like, I don't think he's going to have a bad year, but I also don't think he's, I mean, and this is a high bar. I think the Eagles themselves would admit it's, challenging to say he's going to have the impact that Christian McCaffrey did for the 49ers. Although I do think they're kind of like shooting for something of that. I don't think they're thinking it's a 1-for-1. It's that simple, because it's not. That's a really special year that he had last year. But I think they're kind of hoping it'll be closer to that than it will actually end up being, where he has a good year. Again, solid player. I don't think he's making, the Pro Bowl unless it's as an alternate or something. I don't think he's taking the league by storm. I think he will be, he'll be kind of around what DeAndre Swift was for this team, or what Miles Sanders was for this team in 2022.
Well, if he becomes so DeAndre caught 39 passes last year. Now only for 214 yards, but he caught 39 passes. Now that's way down from his part-time work in Detroit when he was a really good receiver. He once caught 62 balls there. So in theory, if Saquon plays all 17 games, and that's a big if for any running back, and he's a true 3-down back, and if you want to add DeAndre with Kenny Gainwell's 20, whatever Kenny had, and you're up to 60 receptions, I think that's really good. But what is it going to be? Is it going to be that 5.5, 6 versus 8 or 9? The 8 or 9 would be phenomenal. I can't picture that with Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. I mean, we'd have to see that to believe that. I don't think that's just a given at this point.
No. Now, if you're out there, though, obviously the traffic's going to be all out if it's 2 running backs versus 1 running back. But then you start talking about the wear and tear on Saquon Barkley, the 1,500 touches. I just feel like every year we go through the same thing. Now, if Phillip Rivers was the quarterback here, I'd say Saquon's going to catch 70 balls.
Sure.
Bang. The quarterback's a big part of it. And I just, and by the way, why would you want Jalen Hurts doing that? That's my other part of it. Like, if you have Brock Purdy, to use a current quarterback, all right, dump it off. Quick throws. Why would you want to turn Jalen Hurts into that?
Yeah, it's not his game. It's not. At least maybe you want him to do it a little bit more than he's done to this point.
A little bit better.
Sure.
Yeah. That little evolve. You want him to evolve and get better at things he's not good at or hasn't been proficient in. But I don't want to change him completely. I don't know. Maybe it's just off-season talk. Maybe I'm overreacting. But do you think the Eagles are trying to do that, or do you think it's all off-season?
I mean, I do think, based on the early tea leaves, that like Jalen Hurts isn't necessarily thrilled with the new offense. That doesn't mean he won't get to a place where he is. But right now, obviously, I don't think he says the 95% comment without some kind of thought in mind that this is not the same thing. And maybe there are things there that he doesn't necessarily either love or, feel totally comfortable with yet. Again, maybe he will in time. We could see that happen. But right now, I think, there is expectation of, as we kind of lit off the segment here, kind of Jalen Hurts being a little bit of a different person or different kind of leader. I think there's also expectation he's going to be or kind of from the organization, he has to be a little bit different kind of player as well. Has
the organization changed the thought process? Like, Howie came out and called him a game-changing type of player. And in the past, you kind of haven't. We almost talked about running back like we did about linebacker, where it's like they you know, they're going to pick up, they're going to trade a fourth for DeAndre, or they're going to, you know, stick with their draft pick, and they're not going to invest tons of resources. Maybe there's an organizational shift, and that plays into what Jalen Hurts said too, where he's like, "Oh, I don't like it," maybe because they're asking him to do something new. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. Again,
Probably wouldn't be a good thing, but
it's tough because I think, you know, you want to challenge your players at some level to
yeah.
be better. You can't just always acquiesce to them no matter what. I mean, that's kind of some of the problems that arose with Carson Wentz is that they were,
especially a $50 million quarterback, right?
yeah, you can be too differential to a player at some level, but, you know, again, it's kind of striking the balance, and also you don't want to be, you know, discord and, you know, not have harmony at a big level.
Where do you think the disconnect is? I think it was Jeremy Fowler this week who said, and you don't know what these national guys, excuse me, you don't know what these national guys, where they are in the process. So,
Mhm.
you know, before we all got that lip service that it was going to be a meshing of the offenses.
Mhm.
And then Jalen came out and said 95%, as you mentioned, BLG. And then Jeremy's back saying it's going to be a meshing of the offenses. So I don't know if he's just behind the curve. What do you think is going on here? You think it's really new terminology? I mean, everything, football's football. That's what all the players say. You're going to have the same routes and little subtle differences. So it's hard to imagine 95% other than terminology. And then that's, I guess, a second part to this question is, why do new coordinators come in and make veteran players learn a whole new system with terminology if you're going to be running the same play? Isn't it easier to teach one person yourself a new word than a bunch of other guys a different word that they've been using for 3-4 years or whatever?
Yeah, on the Fowler report, I mean, I wonder how much of that is like kind of a bit of a response to the way the Eagles didn't necessarily love how any camp ended there and Hurts his comments and everything, and maybe an attempt at to kind of like be like, hey, people are on the same page or things are going good actually. I wonder if it's pushback on that kind of more from the
Yeah, that
Eagles
could be. Yeah.
camp. I don't know. You know, I'm just wondering. And on the second point, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really think about it that way.
They got egos, man. They got egos. I'm like,
sure.
temper it down. Why?
But also,
To me, it's simple. Like, all right, you know what is this? I'll learn this. I'm one guy. I don't know. I guess it's crazy.
I think part of it is, you know, it's like, hey, we're bringing you in. So there's like this, you know, onus or there's this like pressure. It's like, so you have to deliver. So you have to, you know, you have to like maybe almost not that you ideally want to do this, but there's almost like pressure to overthink it a little bit or, you know, like really put your impact on it, make your mark. It's not like tweaking a little bit here and there. It's like, no, you have to like put your stamp on this offense.
BLG, less than 30 days out from reporting to training camp. Anything top of mind for you going into camp?
I just think that you know, will be very interesting to see how Jalen Hurts looks in training camp. It's easy to be like, hey, it's just practice. It doesn't really matter. I don't really agree with that. I mean, I think back to when Carson Wentz struggled in 2020 training camp, and at the time, I didn't want to make too much of it. So I'm like, okay, it's just practice. I'm not gonna, you know, say that all of what we saw at the end of 2019 when he went on a good run was undone just because he didn't look good in training camp practices. I regretted like not leaning into that enough going into the season where then he obviously looked terrible. So on the flip side of the coin, I've seen Jalen Hurts look bad, or sorry, Nick Foles look bad in training camp practices, like really bad, and then obviously they play at a high level. So at the same time, it's not everything, but it's not nothing, especially coming off OTAs and all this. Just will be really interested. And honestly, I think probably more interested than I expected to be watching him. Like last year in training camp, I'm like, you know, I've seen what Jalen Hurts can do. I'm not really worried about how he looks in camp a ton because I believe in what we saw last year and from 2022. That I'm not going to read into this too much. Whereas this year, I think because of what, you know, going into this new offense and everything and some of the comments, I'm going to be more intrigued than I expected to be, I think, watching him.
Yeah, I've always thought that Jalen's not, practice isn't a great indicator for Jalen because of the stuff, the extending the play kind of
Right.
stuff, the off schedule stuff is going to be blown dead. So you don't get a true feel of what he can be. And I think that's been the case since he has been the starter. So it's a little bit more difficult with Jalen Hurts. At Brandon Gowton, make sure you follow BLG on X, Twitter, Bleeding Green Nation. You can follow him here, follow him there as well. Howie turned 49 on Sunday, last Sunday, BLG. If Howard were going to give himself a present for training camp and he's going to bring in one player, you don't even have to give me the player. Give me the position he wants to buttress before training camp, the first practice on July 24th, I believe.
Yeah, if you're asking me if it's him, because I think there's a different answer, if it's like Vic Fangio, let's say. I think, Vic
but it
wouldn't
ain't
mind.
Vic, it's Howie, man. Howie runs that roster, so it's Howie.
I don't think Vic wouldn't. I think he wouldn't mind another safety, especially because Justin Simmons, Eddie Jackson, those are guys he's coached before, and they could use more depth at that spot. But I think if it's Howie, I think wide receiver still, is one where I think he would like just like a little bit more there, just to feel a little bit better about that spot. And I don't know.
And I saw you guys mention Corey Davis. You picked up the lane. I mentioned Corey Davis as well. He's still young. He retired. He's coming. He unretired. I'm surprised he's still out there. There's a guy I think that could legitimately help this team.
If the buy-in is there, if he's willing to be like at least at a baseline, potentially more than this, but if he's willing to at least do the dirty work and be kind of like Zach Pascal, that kind of role, and then again, God forbid there's an injury or he is looking good in camp or whatever, and he can earn more of an offensive role and more targets than obviously Zach Pascal kind of had. I think that's kind of the path for a player like him, is like, hey, you're coming in, you kind of have to prove it a little bit. Obviously, you're out of the league last year, but prove it to us, and there's an opportunity here. And I think that could make sense for all parties involved.
And Corey was once the 5th pick in the draft. Howie loves that, man. 5th pick in the draft. Bring him. You got Devin White. You got Saquon. Saquon was 2. Devin was 5. Corey Davis fits right in. Right in. Pedigree scouting, I like to call it. BLG.
BLG joining us on Birds 365. Make sure you follow him on Twitter or X at Brandon Gowton and read all his work at Bleeding Green Nation, one of the best Eagles websites out there for your consistent news every single day. BLG, thanks for joining the show, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, bud.
BLG joining us on Birds 365. Good stuff from BLG.